the meeting today. We are going to record, so if you do not want your face shown, go ahead and turn your camera off. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started to keep us on time. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, so real quick, I am going to ask everyone to please mute themselves unless you have a question. Feel free to come off mute or put it in the chat. We'll try to keep up with those questions as we go. Today, we're just going to kind of cover some IEP basics, maybe go about it just a little bit different in a little bit different of a way than we do in our IEP training. So hopefully it will help. And if you have any questions, feel free to come off mute and ask or put it in the chat. So most of you know me. My name is Lisa Howell, and I am the Education Advocate Program Director. I've been with Families Together for almost 6 years now, and 2 of my 4 kiddos were on IEPs in school, and my youngest still is. He's a senior this year. And I'll have Brian introduce himself real quick.
Hi there, I'm Brian. You've probably gotten a few phone calls and emails from me lately. Been with the Education Advocate Program for about a year and a half now, and nice to meet you all. I've met you all. Nice to see you all again.
Thank you, Brian. All right, so real quick, our learning objectives, we're going to review education advocate responsibilities for a few slides, talk about the whole IEP process from evaluation, FAPE, up to the IEP components, goals, transition, and LRE. So as many of you know, education advocate is a Kansas legal term in Kansas special education statute. The federal law under IDEA says that every state Department of Education will be in charge of having a program available to appoint a surrogate parent to children whose parents are unavailable. And Kansas takes that and changes that term surrogate parent to education advocate. So for special education needs, someone who meets the definition of parent that can sign consent, schedule the meetings, ask for meetings, and have to meet one of these definitions. They have to be a biological parent. They have to be an adoptive parent. They have to be a person acting as parent, which if you look at the bottom, it says a person such as a grandparent, step-parent, or other relative with whom the child lives. They have to be a legal guardian, so that means the court will have awarded guardianship papers and the child will no longer be in DCF custody when that happens. Or they have to be an officially appointed education advocate. So education advocate is listed under this definition of parent. So they hold all parental rights. So every time we mention parent, that term is interchangeable with education advocate. So this next slide, I just want to have you either come off mute or put in the chat box when we're talking about, those special education rights and who can give parental consent under special education law versus a caregiver right and those general education consents. So this will be an instance where the child is placed in a foster home and a volunteer advocate is appointed. So would it be the caregiver's responsibility or the person that meets that definition of parent responsibility to sign a field trip permission form?
The parent.
So a field trip permission form is actually going to be a caregiver responsibility. That's a general education right. When we're looking at that parental consent, we're looking at special education needs. So whose job would it be to enroll the child, the caregiver or the person that holds parental consent?
The caregiver.
Absolutely, that would be a caregiver right. How about signing consent for a special education evaluation?
Educational advocate.
Yep, education advocate or someone that meets that definition of parent. If we have a power of attorney, if someone shows up with a power of attorney and says, I have been given educational rights for this child, the parents have signed it over to me. This is kind of a little bit of a different one, but does that sign over general education rights or does that sign over all rights? And think back on that definition of who meets the definition of parent under special education. Was there anything listed under there that said a power of attorney where that parents could transfer that? Yeah, so a power of attorney only gives general education rights. We still have to have someone that meets that definition of parent in order to be the special education decision maker. What if we want to add an accommodation or service to the IEP?
Educational advocate.
Yep, that's the education advocate. And yes, there are different types of power of attorney. So this would just be an educational one that someone would sign. How about scheduling that IEP meeting? Yep. You guys are right in chat. That is the parent or education advocate's responsibility. Now, we want to invite the caregiver if it is not ourselves because they have valuable information. You know, they're the ones that are kind of on ground zero, seeing the child before school, seeing them after school. But it is up to us to schedule that meeting. What about 504 plans? Who has the ability to request evaluation, sign consent for 504 plans? See a couple different answers. So 504 plans do not fall under IDEA. That falls under ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So caregivers can sign consent and call 504 plan meetings. And this is one of the things when we have an unwilling parent, someone who can be reached, but is choosing to not participate in their students' IEP meetings. This is something that the foster parent can do if we can't get that evaluation going, is to maybe set up a 504 plan. And receiving progress notes, IEP progress notes. Whose responsibility is it to receive those?
Educational advocate.
Absolutely correct. The educational advocate. And yes, Bobby, everyone involved in the child's education, but remember, education advocate and parent is, they coexist in that definition of a parent. So that also includes releases of information. So for example, for my child, Gavin, the school cannot send IEP progress notes to an outside agency without my express permission. So just like a parent, as the education advocate, I would have to sign a release of information for the IEP, for the progress notes, for anything to be sent to anyone other than myself. That involves case team, that includes foster parents. A release of information needs to be on file in order for the school to release that.
Right. I look at it as everyone involved in the child's education because I am an educational advocate for children in care. So those releases are already signed. So I was just looking at it from my perspective of everyone that's involved in my child's educational setting. So, but yeah, you're right.
Gotcha. I completely understand that. All right, so who qualifies to have an advocate? Just a quick review. The child has to be school age between 3 to 21. They have to be in the custody of Department of Children's and Family, Department of Corrections, or be listed as homeless and unaccompanied under the McKinney-Vento Act. They have to have unknown or unavailable parents. And this is a special education law. So they have to be receiving special education or in need of an evaluation to see if they're eligible. And an unavailable parent means those rights have been terminated or relinquished. They are deceased. A court order of no contact exists, and the parent is not to know where they're located. We don't know who the parent is, or we don't know where the parent is. And this is something I touched about just a couple slides ago. There's a difference between an unavailable parent and an unwilling parent. Unavailable means the school, the case team has documented that reasonable efforts to locate the parents has been exercised, and we don't know where they are. We don't have a working phone number for them. We don't have a physical address to make visits or to mail documents to. We don't have an email address that we know is valid. Social media does not count. We're not going to be sending special education documents through Facebook Messenger. But the phone, physical address, email, that's what we're looking at. Versus an unwilling parent, which is someone who can be reached but is choosing not to respond. And that's where we can look at implementing more of those general education interventions or 504 plans, working with the school to make small changes that don't require parental consent. And how an appointment is made. Just because a child comes into your home does not mean you are automatically the education advocate. Every child has to be officially appointed. So foster parents can make referrals to us. Just give us a call. Schools, case teams. We will take referrals from anyone. And what we're going to do is we're going to process that referral. We're going to dot our I's and cross our T's, make sure parental rights are terminated or unknown, make sure they're receiving special education. And then once we finish processing that referral and they are eligible, we will always appoint foster parents first because they're, like I said before, on ground zero and know the kiddo the best. And if not, we'll move into volunteers in that area. Or if you are able to serve statewide, we might reach out to you for that as well. And if anyone on here is willing to serve statewide, if you could please put yes or that you are willing in the chat so Brian can take down your name. We are having an excess amount of kiddos in Sedgwick County area this year, and we're having a hard time finding advocates for some of them. So if you are willing to help statewide, Erica, I know you already have a few. If you're willing to help statewide and serve virtually, we would really appreciate it. If not, that's okay too. I know I like to go to in-person meetings, but yeah, if you could put that in there, we'd appreciate it. And then once we have an advocate assigned, once Brian annoys you with emails and phone calls and say, hey, can you serve for this kid or this kid or this kid? And you say yes, of course you could say no. Then we're going to send you all the information that we have, which, as most of you know, sometimes is very little, but we'll at least get you child's name, date of birth, school, foster parent, case team information. And then we'll send out official appointment letters. And after you receive that official appointment letter, that is when you have been officially assigned to that child. So after you're appointed, what should you do? Call the school. Don't wait for the school to call you. Ask for their most recent copy of his IEP and district and state assessment scores, any progress notes that might be available. Make sure your name is listed as the educational decision maker. Get yourself added to the student's parent portal so you can check in on their grades and attendance every couple weeks. Reach out to the foster family and placement. Introduce yourself, what your role is. Ask if they have any concerns about their education. Yes, Erica, follow up with proof. Hey, thanks for speaking with me today. I'm looking forward to receiving the IEP that for blank student. That's very important also. And then reach out to the case team. Ask for any relevant background information. Ask if there's any medical diagnoses, outside psych evaluations, anything that will give you an idea of this child's background and their trauma, because we know all of the kids in our program have some sort of trauma, so that you can effectively advocate for them. And of course, we are available at any time to take your call, answer any emails, review IEPs, brainstorm ideas. That's what we're here for. So please reach out to us. We also want to hear about your advocate wins. A lot of times I'm going to say 99.8%, because we did receive a call last week that was an advocate win. So 99.8% of the calls and emails we receive are when a student is not doing well, but we would like to hear about your wins as well. So this is a QR code just to a little survey that says, tell us about your child's wins, and we want to highlight some of those in our advocate newsletter that goes out quarterly. All right, guys, any questions about that very quick education advocate review that we just went on? Okay. So one of the most common times when we receive an advocate is for, sorry, something's popping up on my screen and it's, okay. So one of the most times that we get a lot of kids with evaluations. A lot of times they'll just say they're struggling with reading. There's been an increase in behaviors, and that is really all the information that we get. So when you get that appointment letter and reach out to the school to make sure that you are listed as the parent or the education decision maker, ask for those school records. Ask for the most recent benchmark assessments, district assessments, state assessments, ask for any behavior referrals. See if a special education evaluation is really warranted. If you feel that they might have a disability, then we want to draft a request letter that Brian will send you in the email after you're appointed to a kiddo that needs an evaluation. And then email that evaluation letter to the principal, if they're in elementary school, to the teacher, to the school psychologist. If you're in the Wichita area, I know it's the social workers that take in evaluation requests. So email that evaluation request letter with a little paragraph just saying, you've noticed over the last year a decline, or that no progress has been made on their district assessments. You've noticed in the last 3 months, their behavior referrals have been escalating. Add in any information you're able to get from the case team, any medical diagnoses, psych evals, and request that a special education evaluation be administered. If you're appointed to a child with an evaluation, we're going to check in on you quite often, because we don't want these kiddos to sit here in this evaluation status. So you'll receive a call after a couple weeks saying, hey, have you reached out to the school? Have you sent an evaluation request? We're going to call back and say, hey, what did the school say to the evaluation request? If you say the school said they don't need one, we're going to ask, do you have the prior written notice stating that? Because we want the reason that the school is denying the evaluation to be in writing, so that if 3 months down the line, case teams calls back in and says, hey, we don't have an evaluation yet, we can say, you're correct, we don't, because the school said that there is progress being made and they're going to start tier 3 general education interventions, and look at possibly a 504 plan. So we have that information to give them. So we're not just reappointing an advocate every 3 months to request another evaluation. That makes sense, guys. All right, so, and after an evaluation request is made and the school replies back and says, yes, we agree to evaluate, you sign consent, which starts your 60-day timeline for the evaluation, and then you're going to go to the eligibility meeting. And to be eligible for special education services in Kansas, there's a 3-pronged set of criteria. Again, it's a school age directive, so between the ages of 3 and 21. student must meet the eligibility criteria for one or more of the 13 categories, and the student must not only meet one of those eligibility criteria for the categories, but they also have to demonstrate a need for special education or related services. So they aren't making progress in the general education curriculum, and they need special education and individualized assistance to make progress. These are our categories in Kansas. None of these require a medical diagnosis, okay? And just on the opposite side of that, a medical diagnosis does not mean that you will qualify for an IEP, okay? There's a difference with a child with a disability, with a child with an exceptionality. In Kansas, we have 13. Gifted is considered an exceptionality. It falls under that as well. But again, there must be a need for specialized instruction and data showing that the student is not able to access that general education curriculum without special education services. And we do have that new dyslexia subset too. So dyslexia is no longer a hush word in Kansas. And if you get pushback from that, let me know, because that's kind of a passion of mine. Okay. All right, so we're at the eligibility meeting. The team's going to go over those evaluation results with you, and sometimes they can be really complicated to understand. So if you don't understand something, please speak up. The results are to determine two things: if they have an exceptionality and need special education services, and what their present levels of academic achievement and functional performance needs are. Now, this is functional performance, okay? So it's not just academic. We have learning standards in Kansas for academic and for social emotional and for behavior, okay? So it's not just academics. We need to be making progress towards our social emotional learning standards and behavior learning standards. And then that functional performance is going to be, are they able to walk across the building? Are they able to use the restroom? Those daily life activities. And what if you disagree with the team's decision? So the team's going to go around and say, do we think that this child qualifies under this exceptionality and for special education services? Everyone gets a vote. You as the advocate also gets a vote. If they say no, we don't agree, respectfully state your disagreement at the meeting. Write that you disagree with the decision next to your signature. You can email the district and ask them to review the results. And you can also consider requesting an independent education evaluation. So that's where the school would pay for an outside agency to do another evaluation. All right, so our kiddo qualifies for an evaluation. We write the IEP, we implement the IEP. Every 3 years, we have to do a reevaluation. However, it can occur more often than 3 years if you request it. So say, for instance, there's a couple kiddos in our program that moved from 5th grade up to the middle school year. Their last evaluation was in 5th grade, but now they're in 7th grade and really struggling, but their 3-year reeval is until 8th grade. We can ask for that to be moved earlier. We also have a lot of situations with kids in care where schools will do reevaluations based on existing data. So an actual evaluation will not happen. They will just say, based on his records, it looks like he still qualifies. So we'll go ahead and keep the IEP. I ran into a kiddo just a couple months ago where an actual evaluation had not been completed for almost 7 years. We were still going off the original evaluation from when they were in elementary school. They had just used existing data twice every 3 years. And so I was like, maybe we need to get some new data. and find out what his current present levels are. So keep an eye on that. Sometimes, our kids move around so much, they just get passed through. So look at those dates on the front of the IEP. It will always say when the last evaluation was and when the next one is going to be. All right, FAPE, free appropriate public education. This is the most important principle of that Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's a concept of a free appropriate public education. So free means that special education related services are provided at no cost to the parent and at public expense. So some kids, especially all of the ones in our program, are Medicaid eligible. So that's where you sign that you're okay or not okay. It's your decision that they bill Medicaid. Public means it's a public school act. Private and parochial schools who do not take federal money are exempt from it. Education means only what the child needs educationally to receive meaningful benefit and make sufficient progress. And this is why those medical diagnoses do not always transfer over. A child might need outside physical therapy, but in school, they're able to access that general education curriculum so they don't need those different things. They have to interfere with the child's learning. And appropriate is that tough word. What is appropriate is determined by the IEP team, which includes the parent or the education advocate. The law says children should receive meaningful benefit from their educational experience. FAPE applies starting with children at age 3 once they start district services. It's not a K through 12 mandate, but a 3 through 21, so as long as they are in school. FAPE also applies to students with disabilities who have been suspended or expelled beyond 10 school days. If they have an IEP or are suspected of having a disability and they've been suspended from school after 10 school days, FAPE continues. So they have to be making progress towards their IEP goals and in the general education environment, progress towards graduation. Those that are identified as gifted are exempt from that discipline provisions. I just want to throw that in there real quick. So how we got this definition of FAPE, Andrew was a child with autism whose parents believed his IEP was not providing the educational benefit he needed. He was a 5th grade student whose parents placed him in private school because they believed his public school education was inadequate. They argue the school's program was leading them to enroll Andrew in a private school because he was not making progress. Years of legal battles later, this is a due process complaint. I think it took 4 years. It made it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they ruled in Andrew's parents' favor, establishing a higher standard of FAPE. And some of the biggest things that came out of that, it was a unanimous ruling, established that IEPs must be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. The former language was de minimis, so minimal progress, but this changed that definition to making progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. And this was just happened in 2017, so it's a newer change. Schools must offer more than minimal progress. IEP goals must be ambitious. That word is in that definition. It must be ambitious and tailored to the child's unique needs. And schools are required to provide programs that allow students to make meaningful progress. The goals should be challenging rather than generic. Okay. And it also required that IEPs be developed with expertise from schools and input from parents. And schools must give responsive explanations for their decisions on denying or approving services. All right, so really quick, let's review the IEP team. The parents are education advocate. not less than one regular education teacher of the child if they are in the regular education environment. If they are in an alternative school or a day school, they might not have a regular education teacher. So that's kind of why it says if they're participating in the regular education environment. Now, I will say on here, if your child has an IEP for specific learning disability dyslexia, you might want to request that it is the English teacher or whichever teacher they're struggling with the most that comes to the meeting. I once showed up at my son's IEP, which is for specific learning disability, and the PE teacher was there for the regular education teacher. I did not like that very much because they could not talk to me about my child's reading, which is what the IEP was written for. So not less than one regular education teacher. It does not specify who. So if you want a certain one to be there, make sure you ask. Not less than one special education teacher of the child, a district representative, someone to interpret any evaluation results if the evaluations occurred. The child, when appropriate, they're required to be invited starting at the age of 14. Otherwise, it's up to you or the parents, foster parents, to decide when it's appropriate. My children always attended their IEP meetings, if only for 5 minutes, to say what they liked or did not like about school when they were younger. I think their involvement is important, personal opinion, and getting them in that room and teaching them how to start talking to adults about what they need and want is important as well. And then others with special knowledge or expertise about the child. This is going to be where foster parents and case team managers fall under. They have special expertise about the child, so we want them to be in that meeting. You notice there are, actually, I think it's going to be here on the next page. Oh, nope, one more. I'm going to skip ahead, but we'll talk about this. These are the 4 people that are required to be there. If one of these are not there, you have to sign your consent that you're okay with it. I almost always want my regular education teacher there, especially in elementary school, or for example, if my Gavin has a dyslexia diagnosis, so I want the English teacher there because that is where most of the goals, most of the data is going to be taken. They're going to be doing those accommodations that are in there. Their buy-in to this IEP and knowledge of the IEP is imperative for it to work. Special education is the one that's giving services. We need them there. Now I understand things come up. We've had this meeting planned for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, she came down with COVID and has a 104-degree fever. I get that. What I don't get is, and where I kind of draw that line is, oh, she had we couldn't get her to be here because we didn't have someone to cover for her class. While that's understandable, that should be relayed to me before I get there. A lot of times you'll see an excusal slid across the table when you get to the IEP meeting saying, oh, she couldn't make it. We didn't have coverage for that class. Can you sign that it's okay for her to not attend? You can say no. You can say, I'm sorry, I feel it's really important for them to be there. Can we look at our schedules and see when we can reschedule it so they can be there? I had an IEP meeting this morning for a kiddo that I advocate for. The school psychologist was double booked, but the school psychologist called me last week, had a 35-minute discussion with me about what she was recommending. We talked about it. She asked if I had any questions. She interpreted those evaluation results for me, even though she was not able to be present at the meeting. And she did show up for 5 minutes and introduced herself and apologized that she was double booked and asked if it was okay for her to be dismissed. And I said yes, because she reached out, she talked to me, and I got that information that I needed. So definitely times where this is okay, also times where I think it's used as a convenience. All right, so first steps in the IEP process, and I'm going to point out, you're going to see his face a lot. This is my oldest son, Gavin, when he was 4. He does not look like this anymore. He's a senior in high school, but The first step is we need to know who the student is when we're looking at the IEP. And this is what the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance give us. That first part in the IEP tells us who that child is, what their strengths are, what their preferences are, what their interests are, what their needs are. I like to go through with a highlighter, and if I see a need, I highlight it because all of the needs that are listed in the present levels should be somewhere else in the IEP. Okay. So we want to know who the child is. What are their unique strengths, talents, and interests? What do they want in life? What do they struggle with day to day? What are the resources in the school and community to help the student prepare for life after school? If they are scared, if they're always late to the third hour because the person that has been bullying them is in the same hallway, we need to know that. And that needs to be put in there so that we can come up with a way for him to take an alternate route to school. If we know that Billy has high behaviors and every time Billy gets behind Kathy in line, he's going to pull her hair, we need to know that. Those are those little bits of information because we need to not put Billy behind little Kathy in line. And you know what? I bet that behavior is going to not happen if we don't put them in those situations. Their social skills, their sensory needs, communication, speech language, their academic needs, fine motor skills, self-help, health needs, and behavior challenges all should be in there. And executive functioning is another part of that. Like I said, we have social emotional standards in the state of Kansas. This is an awesome resource. I don't know if I can get it to work. Let me see. Oh. Let me see if I can click on it. Nope, it's not letting me click on it. But if you hover over these, so like say our kiddo's really struggling with time management. If you hover over it, it's going to come up with a Padlet that gives different assessments you can give to see where their present levels are in time management and different accommodations that the school can give or that you can put in the IEP to help with time management. It's a really cool tool. KSDE uses this. It's on KSDE's website, and it is aligned with the social emotional standards in the state of Kansas. Okay, so we know who the child is, and next we want to ask, what will the child learn? So we're going to identify an area of focus or need, and it's going to have a direction that has reasonable expectations but high standards. And it has to be tied to the general education curriculum. It has to be tied to one of the standards the KSDE sets out our students need to learn. It's based on a need that was identified in the student's present levels: reading, behavior, self-advocacy, peer relationships. We need to know what direction we want to take. Do we want to increase? Do we want to decrease behaviors? Do we want to maintain? Reasonable expectations. We want this amount of change by the end of the IEP year. So it's not our job to write goals, but it is helpful to recognize a well-written goal. If a goal contains these 4 parts, we can understand what and how our student is learning. So the behavior is going to be what you want the child to do. Sarah will read. Scott will initiate interaction. Our condition is going to specify the manner in which they're going to progress toward that goal, and involves the application of the skills and knowledge. What materials will be used. It describes the setting, under what circumstances, and how much support. So using grade level problems, using 2nd grade reading text, using preferred words and coping strategies. That's going to be our condition. Criteria identifies how much. This is going to be the numbers or percentages of the goal. 80% of sight words with no less than 3 errors. 90% accuracy as measured by anecdotal records. And then a time frame, May of 2025 or at the end of the IEP year. And this is, I do want to point out, this is where we want to look at that ambitious portion that we talked about in FAPE. Every goal is going to have a baseline with it stating this is their present level, this is where they are right now. So right now, Gavin is achieving 65% of sight words with 5 errors. And we want it to go to 80% of sight words with no less than 3 errors. That is a good goal. That's a good jump. We're increasing the number of sight words and decreasing the amount of errors. If our baseline, our present level is 65% and the goal is at 70%, that's not really ambitious. I think we can do better than that. So looking at those discrepancies too is important. The goals are the important part of the IEP. I can't stress that enough. A lot of times I will talk with parents and they're not giving them their accommodations. They're not doing this, they're not doing this. And I will ask, how much progress are they making towards their goals? And they can't even tell me what their goals are. So the goals are what drives everything. The school has to, the whole point is for them to make progress towards those IEP goals, right? Everything else is to support the progress towards those IEP goals. But we need to be making progress towards those goals. So putting it all together, the behavior, Sarah will read. The condition, when presented with 2nd grade reading material and independently. Our criteria is going to be our numbers, 80 words per minute with no more than 3 errors, time frame in 36 weeks. So in 36 weeks, when presented with 2nd grade reading material, Sarah will read independently 80 words per minute with no more than 3 errors. Short-term objectives and benchmarks are statements that describe the steps to be taken to reach that annual goal. So it breaks that annual goal into parts. They are measurable and listed in order. These are not required except for children who take the alternate DLM testing, that dynamic learning map testing, which is less than 3% of our kids on IEPs. Although schools do not have to utilize them, we like them a lot. It breaks that goal down so we know exactly what to look for on the progress reports. Short-term objectives, example, so if the goal is giving a writing topic or prompt, Gavin will follow the steps of the writing process to develop a 5-paragraph essay. Short-term objective is going to say by quarter 1, he's going to master pre-writing. By quarter 2, he's going to master drafting. By quarter 3, he's going to master editing. By quarter 4, he's going to master publishing. So it's breaking that big objective down and chunking it into smaller objectives. While benchmarks deal more with numbers. So Addison will be able to solve real-world math problems with 90% accuracy. First quarter, we're going to go to 75%. Second quarter, 80%. Third quarter, 85%. And then that fourth quarter will be at 90%. Okay, step 3, what will the student learn? This is where we're going to ask ourselves what the student needs to progress towards their goals and in the general education curriculum. So how we do that is accommodations. They do not change the content that's being taught, but the way the material is presented, and it can involve many kinds of techniques, strategies, and support systems. This can be provided for instructional methods and materials, assignments and assessments, learning environments, preferential seating, read aloud, separate setting, take a break, visual schedule, use of a calculator, chunking of assignments, transition, prompting. Those are going to be accommodations. The second way is modifications. And this alters the general education curriculum to meet the needs of the student. This can be anything from half of a spelling list to removing distractor questions or answers. That was one my Gavin has. Multiple choice questions usually have 4 answers, and we made a modification to only give him 3 answers. With his dyslexia, it's easier for him to read through it. They can also have, for example, one of our staff members has a child with autism level 3. And so in the history class, they were learning about explorers, and they're writing papers about explorers, learning where they landed and sailed. But what Sean did is he learned to explore in his area. So we explored what was in the nurse's office, explored what was in, outside, out back. So there's different levels of modifications, and they just have to match as closely as we can with that general education curriculum and those standards. There's also consideration of special factors. Children with limited English proficiency, we have to consider their language needs. Consideration of their communication needs. Are they blind? Do they need ASL interpreter? Do they need assistive technology? Do they need an AAC device? And parent concerns have to be asked as well. What are your concerns about your child? And make sure they're in there. These must be addressed for every child. There's another section, challenging behaviors, and in the present levels, there's a section that asks, does your student's behavior impedes his learning or the learning of others? If their behavior impedes their learning or the learning of others, we need to make sure that is checked yes. I went to an IEP meeting just last week where a student had 53 behavior referrals in one semester, and that box was checked no. It was like, I'm pretty sure that their behavior is impeding their learning. They kind of have to be in the classroom in order to learn. But if in the event that there is a behavior impeding their learning, the law specifically uses the word positive. Behavior goals and plans should not be punitive, but they have to contain positive supports and strategies. That is written in law. If a behavior is impeding their learning, before we write a behavior plan, we need to ask for a functional behavior assessment to be done. If they already have an IEP, behavior has started out of nowhere, we can always ask for a new evaluation with the same evaluation request letter that we send. Ask for a functional behavior assessment so we can find out those antecedents or triggers to the behavior so we can watch for them and then learn how to teach replacement behaviors. And this doesn't have to be, I want to also point out, this does not have to be destructive behavior. How we hear about classrooms getting destroyed, students have to be removed, punches thrown. It can be something as simple as a behavior that a child is doing to themselves, banging their head against the wall, different kinds of stems. I had one young lady who, during testing, she got so anxious, she bit her fingernails to where she would start bleeding in class. And that was a behavior that was impeding her learning. So we were able to do a functional behavior assessment to get a plan in place to help her learn a replacement behavior. So it doesn't just have to be these big behaviors. They can be small behaviors that are not allowing them to make progress in the general education curriculum or towards their IEP goals, which is what FAPE is there for. We also have to talk about additional needs. Transportation. Does the child require special transportation? Do they need physical or occupational therapy, speech therapy, sign language interpreters, assistive technology? These are services that are provided, required to help a child with a disability benefit from their education. Now, the key difference between IEPs for students that students have before the age of 14 and after is that after the age of 14, the IEP must address transition. And they must address their employment goals, their further education and training goals, an independent living goal, if applicable. I always think that one is applicable, even if it's just I want to live on my own, or I need to learn how to ride a bus. I need to learn how to call and make a doctor's appointment. Our kiddos need a lot of help in learning how to adult. So I believe that there's always an independent living goal that could be in there. And then there's also a section on community participation. We can look at health, we can look at self-determination, interpersonal relationships. We'll have a lunch and learn, looks like in April for all about transition. I absolutely believe that every child should have a referral to Voc Rehab. There's going to be a section in the transition portion asking if a referral to PREETS, which is pre-employment transition services, or Voc Rehab is appropriate. PREETS is going to be for our lower incident kids, like a on-the-job training, and that can start as young as 14. A job coach would come and take them out to the community to try to find different jobs that they like. Voc Rehab, the referral is usually made 18 months before their graduation date. The school is not responsible for determining who is eligible for Voc Rehab. So that is why I feel that every child may be referred to Voc Rehab. They can help pay for school if they want to go to school after high school. If they don't want to go to school, they can help them get a job. They can, with a job coach, they can help give interview skills. They can help buy a bus pass so that they can get to the job on time. They can help buy clothing if they need clothing for the job. And there's not both my children on the IEPs qualify for Voc Rehab services. My son that has dyslexia and my son that was served under other health impairment. He has severe anxiety and depression. So our kiddos do not have to be needing the most services in order to qualify. If you have a disability, you will more than likely qualify for Voc Rehab services. So your IEP team can make that referral, or if you just Google Voc Rehab Referral Kansas, and actually I have it saved on my computer. I will send out flyers on both Voc Rehab and PREETS, and applications that you can send in if you don't want to wait, or if you feel the school might fight you on making a referral. Just like us, they receive applications from anyone. So I'll add that to the information that I send out. Individualized healthcare plan is another need that might occur. This is for our medically fragile kiddos. This is usually made with a school nurse, and it can be anything from if they have a feeding tube to asthma, anything that might need to be added to the IEP, or it can be separate without an IEP as well, for our medically fragile kiddos. Okay, so we know who the student is from the present levels. We know what the student is going to learn from their goals. We know what will help the student learn, our accommodations, our modifications, our communication needs, behavior needs. So now we're going to look at who is going to help my child learn. Our general education teachers, our special education teachers, related services. So this is going to be transportation, physical, PT and OT, speech therapy, sign language interpreters, a behavior plan. We need to consider what time of day these related services are scheduled. We need to make sure it's listed, how we're going to monitor progress, frequency, duration, and location. So this service is going to be a pull-out service. We're going to remove them from the general education classroom. 2 times a week for 20 minutes every time. Also, supports for school personnel, I think, is looked over quite a bit. This is any kind of in-service training that school support may need to implement the IEP. Teacher consultation, direct instruction by the special educator and the educator in the classroom. I know my kiddos, I asked to have in there once they reach high school that anytime they had a teacher change, the special education teacher would meet with that teacher for 15 minutes to review accommodations and modifications. So supports for school personnel, I think, is an overlooked area. Supplementary aids and services. Aid services and other supports that are provided in a regular education class to enable children with disabilities to be educated with non-disabled children to the maximum extent possible. We want them in their least restrictive environment. These supports can be planned seating on the bus or in the classroom or at lunch. Consultation, stop and support, one-on-one assistance, behavior specialist support, planning time for collaboration. A sticky note on the side of a laptop because a child doesn't want to raise their hand to ask for help. That was on mine as well. Do they need specialized equipment, wheelchair, computer software, voice synthesizer? Do they need breaks or more time for assignments? Do they need a set of materials to keep at home? Do lectures need to be taped, sign language? Does tests need to be scanned so they can take it on the computer and have it read to them in text-to-speech app? Do they need Braille? Do they need shorter assignments? Do they need self-management help, calendars, teach study skills? Really anything at all that you can think of to keep a child in the least restrictive environment is where we want to be. So now we're going to look at where the child will learn that least restrictive environment. This is the where. We write the IEP and then we see where the child needs to be to best receive those services to the maximum extent possible. With children should be educated with children who are non-disabled. So the IEP must include the extent that they will not participate with children who are non-disabled. Placement is determined at least annually based on the IEP and services and is as close to the student home as possible, okay? Examples of placement: general education classroom with support or a recess room. Every district is required to have this full continuum. Before a child with a disability can be placed outside of the general education environment, we have to have used that full range to keep them in there. And this is something to really pay attention to. It's not a one-way street. We always want to be asking, what can we do to move our children back to the lesser restrictive environment? So our least restrictive environment is a general education classroom. Next down that list is a special class. So pull out for speech therapy, okay, or going to the resource room for extra for individualized reading instruction. Next down there is going to be special schools, our alternative schools, our day schools. Home instruction is used short term. It's for our medically fragile kids. It's a lot different than homeschool or virtual school. And then our most restrictive is going to be instruction in hospitals and institutions. So we mostly see that as PRTFs, psychiatric rehabilitation treatment centers. Lake Mary is the most restrictive setting. But again, we always want to see what we can do to move back to that lesser restrictive environment. All right, and then review and update the IEP at least annually. An IEP is a fluid document. Remember, you can meet at any time if you see progress isn't being made in those progress reports that you're receiving. If you see a sudden dip in their grades, ask for an IEP meeting. If they're not making progress towards their IEP goals or in the general education curriculum, something in that IEP isn't working. So we need to come together as a team again to discuss it. All right, guys, that was a lot of information very quickly. Like I said, I'm going to send a copy of the PowerPoint slides. You'll get a certificate of completion, a link to an evaluation of the training. Our grants require us to do that. So if you could follow that link, they're anonymous, and fill that out, I would really appreciate it. A link to our Padlet with a lot of different resources, and then I'll send that voc rehab and pre-ETS information. These are our upcoming trainings. When you get the PowerPoint slides, you'll be able to click on each of these to go directly to the sign up link. And then we have our full day trainings. We have 3 planned in the future. We haven't got to our spring ones yet. And this is a link to our Padlet, mine and Brian's email addresses. As always, we are here to support you. That is our job. We love hearing from you, so please give us a call. All right, we are at 1 o'clock, so I understand if you have to go, but does anyone have any questions? No? All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We'll get you marked as completing your 2025 retraining requirement. Again, if you want to go to any of the other trainings, feel free to sign up, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Becky, I will we'll email a certificate out to you.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Thank you much.
Have a good day, Barbara. You're welcome. Bye, Kyra.